I talk a lot about the problems with the MPP's initiative. I've been involved in the criticism of the MPP's initiative and the promotion of the rival initiative, the AZ-FMR initiative, which now will not be on the ballot. According to that organization, they were unable to collect the required number of signatures. But it was far and away a much superior initiative insofar as its provisions that were protective of consumer rights and free enterprise. But that initiative is now no longer, and we have the MPP or nothing. And so there are people out there who have, over the last few months, maybe thought that I was tough on the MPP's initiative by pointing out the many, in my opinion, problems with the MPP's initiative. In fairness, there are also reasons why the MPP's initiative, despite all of its defects and imperfections, is still would be overall a good thing if it passed. I've always told everybody what you'll get from me is the truth. What you'll get from me are the facts. It's not for me to decide how you vote. It's for you to decide on your own, but as a fully informed voter. So in fairness, let me say that there are some things that the MPP's initiative does do that people that are good things for the state of Arizona. Number one, of course, it decriminalizes, it legalizes the possession and use of up to 1 ounce of cannabis and 5 grams of what are referred to as concentrates. These are hash oil, what commonly referred to extractions of THC, a more concentrated form. It legalizes the possession and use of that. Now, in recent years, we've had between 15 and 20,000 arrests around Arizona for possession of marijuana. Many of those charged as felonies. Those individuals having to ultimately undergo the humiliating process of drug testing, urinating in front of other adults who are watching you, being on probation, restrictions from travel, and all the other humiliations that come along with a criminal conviction, and as well as some people going to prison and State Department of Corrections or local jails. So this is, and even just undergoing the process of being arrested and booked, and cavity searched and all the other things that go into an arrest for a nonviolent marijuana crime. These are things that the MPP's initiative would improve. So as long as that person wasn't in possession of more than 1 ounce, they would likely avoid arrest unless they were, I don't know, operating a motor vehicle or something else was going on beyond just the simple possession of marijuana. That's a good thing. Now, I think that it will, while those arrests will dramatically decline, I think arrests for other activities will proportionately increase. For example, the unlicensed sale of marijuana or the production of marijuana, I think will increase. And that's based on the fact that we have roughly 100 dispensaries right now serving a consumer population of registered patients of approximately 100,000 who are incapable of meeting that demand and who purchase their inventory from the black market itself. I know this because I represent those persons who sell to the dispensaries who get in trouble and get charged with criminal offenses. And we recently had a dispensary raided because they were found to have been purchasing from a medical marijuana caregiver. When the population of consumers goes from 100,000 patients to potentially every adult over the age of 21, and some people estimate the number of people who would actually be interested in consuming marijuana to be between 500,000 and 1.5 million, whatever that number is, it's significantly higher than the 100,000 patients that the 100 licensed dispensaries are currently serving. Under the MPP's initiative, only there will only the number of retail outlets for cannabis is restricted to 10% of the number of Series 3 liquor licenses, which right now is between 150 and 160. So not a significant, not a substantial increase in the number of retail outlets, but a dramatic increase in the number of consumers, likely. Now, since the dispensary industry has been supporting the black market, who is producing a large portion of their inventory on record, we can imagine that this will not change when the demand is even higher and the number of licenses are not significantly increased. So I think that while we will see a reduction in the number of arrests for simple possession of marijuana, we will see also, though, an increase in the number of arrests for sales or cultivation-related offenses. Having said all that, though, there are a couple other very important reasons why a person might choose to vote yes for the MPP's initiative, despite all of its failings or deficiencies. Number one is we only have 4 states in the United States that have legalized marijuana, cannabis use: Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. On the other hand, for medical marijuana, in the last 20 years, we now have 25 states and the District of Columbia that have, as they say, medicalized the use of marijuana, allow doctors to prescribe or recommend it, and for the state to issue a registration or license for a patient to use it. And the federal government has announced an official non-enforcement policy where they have said that it is the very low priority for the enforcement of the Federal Controlled Substances Act in states where persons are operating in compliance with their state program. So it's probably politically impossible for the federal government at this point to reverse medical marijuana with half the half of the country on board, and probably several more to join it this election year in November. I don't think is politically impossible for the federal government to roll back recreational with only 4 states. I think that the federal government will probably end up preempting and controlling the medical marijuana industry, the use of medical marijuana. But I don't think at this point that there's any chance that they could possibly take it away. That's not the case with recreational. From a political standpoint, it's critical that we get as many recreational states as possible under our belts, so to speak, before we end up with an administration or a Congress that is adverse to cannabis policy reform. I would hate to see Arizona be a stumbling block. If Arizona passes the MPP's legalization initiative, the rest of the country won't look at it like it was an investor-driven initiative, which it is. They won't look at it like it's a measure that's promoting the monopolization, or more properly put, the oligopolization, an oligopoly or an oligarchy of control over the industry. They'll just look at it like, here's another state, a 5th state, that now, in Arizona, just as a matter of fact, who has legalized the use of marijuana for recreational purposes. And I think that adds to the political momentum, especially if it's joined by other states this November, and then still more states in 2018. The more states we end up getting, the more politically difficult or eventually impossible it becomes to reverse that trend. And so that's one reason why one might vote yes for MPP, despite its many imperfections. Another reason is related to that, but instead of a political, it's a legal argument, and that is that the Supreme Court has articulated in the recent decades a concept that they use a phrase, evolving sense of decency. This idea that American values, American morals can evolve, and that conduct that maybe was okay to prohibit in the past has become acceptable conduct that cannot be prohibited in the future and is now in violation of the penumbra of protections afforded under the United States Constitution for personal privacy. I can give you probably the best example of that, and we see this with gay marriage, we see this with abortion, we see this with adultery. While we may not agree with those activities, and someone might say that I disagree that a person should be able to commit adultery, or that's wrong, or whatever. We no longer put people in prison for that. We no longer convict people of crimes for that. And among these protections was the kind of defined differently depending on what state you were in, but a crime that was called sodomy. All states at one point had laws prohibiting sodomy. And this eventually, though, American people in many states started to say, listen, I don't think that we should have police in the bedroom. I don't think that we should be arresting married people for engaging in sexual conduct that maybe we find distasteful. And the Supreme Court basically said in the case of sodomy that there were enough states that in a particular period of time had legalized sodomy or decriminalized sodomy, that it now was a privacy interest that was protected under the United States Constitution, and that no state could now make sodomy, continue to criminalize sodomy, for example. I'm giving you that example because it is probably the main source of cases where a lot of these other areas of privacy end up getting protection. Now, the use of cannabis is another activity. And we've had tremendous success over the last 20 years in the area of medical marijuana, but it's complicated because the medical use of marijuana, the federal government has preempted the controlled substances industry, the pharmaceutical industry. It's hard to declare that no state may prohibit the medical use of marijuana. We've tried it, and it hasn't worked yet in federal courts. But the recreational use, that's different. That is consensual adult conduct that has become very accepted in the United States, which historically was always accepted in the United States until recent decades, and which has, of course, had been a dismal failure economically and politically. We incarcerate more persons in the United States than any other country on this planet in history, including China. And per capita, more than any other, you name the worst dictatorship that you can think of, we have more of a percentage of our population behind bars than they do. What are they behind bars for? Nonviolent drug-related offenses. What are most of those drug-related offenses? They're cannabis-related. So it's been a dismal failure. No one, I don't think, at this point could argue otherwise without being disingenuous. But we've come to a point now where I think that we can make the argument, if we can get a few more states to legalize cannabis for recreational purposes, where we can make that argument and possibly win that argument, in federal court, where we might be able to achieve a Supreme Court decision that says cannabis use for recreational purposes is now conduct that has become acceptable to the American people, and based on the evolving sense of decency that we have articulated, the standard that we've articulated in other cases, for example, involving sodomy laws, we now are adding to that list of protected conduct the recreational use of cannabis. So that, although more technical point than just the political momentum, but related. In other words, the more states we get passed, the better. And that's a good reason, I think, for voting yes to the MPP's initiative, in fairness, despite its, again, many flaws. But having said that, it is critical that we pass, if MPP's initiative does pass, we must pass a corrective initiative in 2018 to address all of the problems that I've discussed here with their initiative. And that's what, that's the word I'm trying to get out. I don't tell anyone whether they vote yes or vote no. Here's what the facts are. You are able to make up your mind for yourself. Isn't this what that's all about in the beginning? An adult being able to make his or her mind up for him or herself, and whether to use cannabis or not, whether to vote yes to MPP or no. That's for the adult to decide with informed consent.